Professor Tilvan stood at the front of her classroom at the Galactic Science Academy. Her silver scales caught the light as she moved between the rows of students. Each seat was different, designed for the many species that studied together. Some students sat in chairs. Others floated in special fields. A few needed water tanks. "Today we begin something special," Tilvan said. Her voice had a musical quality that the translation devices carried to every student. "You will each design a survival test. But here is the challenge. You must create a test that pushes your own species to the limit." The classroom buzzed with excitement. A large student named Thornik shifted in his reinforced seat. His body was covered in thick gray armor that looked like stone. His species, the Kralix, were known across the galaxy as nearly indestructible. He clicked his mandibles together, making a sound like rocks grinding. Near the window, a student named Zenri glowed with a soft blue light. His body absorbed radiation the way plants absorb sunlight. His species could walk through nuclear waste and feel nothing. They lived on planets that would cook most other beings alive. Floating near the ceiling was Puel. His body was transparent, filled with swirling gases. He did not breathe oxygen like many species. He could survive in the vacuum of space without protection. His people thought atmosphere was a weakness. At the back of the room sat Lucy. She had brown hair pulled into a ponytail. Her skin was pale, showing small freckles across her nose. She wore the standard academy uniform, which looked thin and soft compared to the natural armor and exotic bodies around her. She was human from a planet called Earth. "Who wants to present their idea first?" Professor Tilvan asked. Most students looked down or away. Designing a test was easy. Being the first to demonstrate it was harder. No one wanted to look weak in front of their classmates. Lucy raised her hand. The classroom went quiet. Then someone laughed. It was a gurgling sound that came from Puel's translation device. "The human volunteers?" Puel said. "This will be over quickly." Professor Tilvan's eyes narrowed. "Lucy, come forward and explain your idea." Lucy walked to the front. She was shorter than most students. Her movements looked fragile compared to Thornik's heavy steps or Zenri's gliding walk. She touched the control panel and a hologram appeared in the air. The hologram showed a large sealed room. It had basic furniture, some equipment and monitoring systems built into the walls. "I propose a 48-hour endurance test," Lucy said. Her voice was calm and clear. 4 volunteers will enter a sealed chamber. The environment will change throughout the test. Temperature will shift. The atmosphere will adjust. Resources will be limited. Nothing will be dangerous enough to cause permanent harm, but it will be uncomfortable. "That is all?" asked a student near the front. "Just sitting in a room?" "Not sitting," Lucy said. "Surviving. Adapting. Continuing when your body wants to stop." Thornik stood up. His massive frame made the floor shake slightly. "I volunteer. My armor can withstand any temperature your soft world produces. This will be easy." Zenri drifted forward. "I also volunteer. My body processes energy that would kill others. I fear no environmental change." Puel floated down from the ceiling. "I accept this challenge as well. Let us show the proper way evolution should work. The human will learn what real adaptation looks like." Professor Tilvan looked at the 3 volunteers, then at Lucy. "You understand you will be competing against species with natural advantages? Thornik's armor protects him from physical stress. Zenri processes radiation and extreme heat. Puel needs no oxygen and can survive in vacuum. What advantages do humans have?" Lucy met her teacher's eyes. "That is what this experiment will show, Professor." The classroom erupted in conversation. Students immediately began making bets with each other. "I bet 5 credits the human quits in 3 hours, one student said. 3 hours? I give her 6 at most, another replied. Deathworlders are supposed to be tough, but she has no armor, no radiation resistance, no special abilities, a third student added. What can she possibly do? Professor Tilvan raised one hand and the room fell silent. Very well. Tomorrow morning, Lab Chamber 7. I will monitor all vital signs. Safety protocols will be active at all times. If anyone is in real danger, I will stop the experiment. The rest of the class will observe and document everything. This is a learning opportunity for everyone. She looked directly at Lucy. Are you certain about this? Lucy nodded. Yes, Professor. Then we begin a dawn cycle. Prepare yourselves. The class ended and students filed out, still talking excitedly about the upcoming test. Thornik walked past Lucy, his heavy footsteps echoing in the hall. No shame in quitting early, human, he said. His voice was like grinding boulders. Better to admit weakness than to suffer needlessly. Zenri glided past next. His glow pulsed brighter for a moment. I will try not to make you look too bad. Perhaps you will last until lunchtime. Puel floated by without speaking, but his translation device made a sound that was clearly amused. Lucy watched them go. She gathered her materials and left the classroom. Other students whispered as she passed. Some looked at her with pity. Others with curiosity. A few seemed almost concerned. That evening Lucy sat in her small dorm room. She laid out the items she would bring to the test. A water bottle. Protein bars. A thin blanket. All within the rules Professor Tilvan had set. Nothing technological. Nothing that gave special advantages. Just basic supplies. She thought about Earth. Her home planet was listed in the galactic databases as a Class 12 death world. It was considered one of the most hostile environments that had ever produced intelligent life. Extreme temperature swings. Dangerous weather. Predators everywhere. Limited resources in many regions. Diseases. Parasites. A gravity that was heavy compared to most habitable worlds. But Earth had taught humanity something important. It taught them to adapt. To endure. To keep going when everything said to stop. Lucy had grown up hiking in mountains where the air was thin. She had camped in deserts where water was scarce. She had trained her body and mind to handle discomfort. Not because she was special, but because that was what humans learned to do. She finished packing and set her alarm. Tomorrow would be interesting. Her classmates expected her to fail. They saw her soft skin and lack of armor. They saw no obvious advantages. They did not understand what it meant to be from a death world. They would learn. The next morning, Lab Chamber 7 was crowded with students. They pressed against the observation windows, fighting for the best view. Holographic displays floated throughout the room, showing vital signs, environmental readings, and time counters. Professor Tilvan stood at the control station, her clawed fingers moving across the panels with practiced ease. Inside the sealed chamber, students prepared themselves. The room was large, about 30 meters across. It had simple furniture, basic exercise equipment, and a small area with limited food and water supplies. Monitoring sensors covered the walls, tracking everything that happened inside. Thornick stood near the center, his massive armored body taking up significant space. He tested his weight against the floor, making sure the structure could handle him. His thick gray shell gleamed under the lights. He looked completely confident. Zenri floated near one wall, his body pulsing with soft blue light. He had already scanned the room for radiation sources and found none. That was fine. His species could generate their own energy from heat and light. He crossed his arms and smiled at the watching students. Puel drifted near the ceiling, his transparent form swirling with gases. He needed no chair, no bed, no real supplies. His species could enter a meditation state that lasted for days. He barely considered this a challenge. Lucy sat on a simple bench, her small bag beside her. She had changed into comfortable clothes that could handle temperature changes. Her hair was still pulled back in a practical pony tie. She looked calm, almost relaxed. Professor Tilvan's voice came through the speakers. We are about to begin. The experiment will last 48 hours. The environment will change in ways that simulate various planetary conditions. You each have emergency buttons built into your wristbands. Press them if you need to exit immediately. I am monitoring all vital signs. If I see danger, I will stop the test. Does everyone understand? All 4 students signaled their agreement. Then we begin now. The heavy door sealed with a hiss. Red lights turned green. The experiment was active. For the first hour, nothing changed. The temperature stayed comfortable. The atmosphere was standard oxygen-nitrogen mix. The students settled into different areas of the chamber. Thornick did stretching exercises, his joints grinding softly. Zenri meditated while floating. Puel entered his trance state immediately. Lucy sat quietly, controlling her breathing and observing her surroundings. Outside the chamber, students grew restless. Nothing is happening, one complained. Wait, another said. Look at the environmental controls. Professor Tilvan is starting the sequence. On the displays, numbers began to shift. Temperature readings started climbing. Inside the chamber, Lucy noticed it first. The air grew warmer, then hot. Within 10 minutes, the temperature had risen to 40 degrees Celsius. Sweat began forming on Lucy's skin. She removed her outer layer, staying in a light shirt. Thornick seemed unbothered. His armor insulated him from temperature changes. Zenri actually looked more energetic, absorbing the heat like food. Puel remained in his trance, completely unaffected. The watching students laughed. See? The human is already sweating. She will quit soon. But Lucy simply drank water in small measured sips. She slowed her movements to conserve energy. She found a spot with slight air circulation and sat still. The heat continued for 2 hours. Then suddenly the temperature dropped. Fast. Within 20 minutes, the chamber reached 5 degrees Celsius. Frost formed on the metal walls. Breath became visible as clouds of vapor. Now Thornick shifted uncomfortably. His armor, which protected him from impacts, conducted the cold efficiently. His species came from a warm planet. Extreme cold was not natural to them. He began moving, trying to generate heat through activity. Zenri's glow dimmed slightly. His body still processed the reduced heat from the lights, but he was less comfortable. His movements became slower. Puel remained unchanged. Temperature meant little to his species. Lucy pulled on her outer layer again. She wrapped the thin blanket around her shoulders. She began doing small exercises, muscle movements that generated warmth without burning too much energy. She had learned this technique during winter camping trips on Earth. Professor Tilvan watched the vital signs carefully. Interesting, she murmured. The human's heart rate is elevated but controlled. She is managing the stress. 3 hours into the experiment, the atmosphere began to change. The oxygen level dropped from 21% to 15%. It was like being on a high mountain. Thornick immediately noticed. His breathing became heavier, louder. His species needed rich oxygen to fuel their massive bodies. He sat down, trying to reduce his oxygen needs. Zenri also struggled. His species breathed oxygen like most beings. The thin air made him dizzy. He stopped floating and landed on the ground, conserving energy. Puel floated peacefully. He did not breathe oxygen at all. This change meant nothing to him. Lucy's breathing became deeper and more deliberate. She had trained at high altitudes before. Her body knew how to extract oxygen efficiently from thin air. She moved slowly and rested frequently, but she remained functional. Outside, the betting intensified. Students exchanged credits rapidly as their predictions changed. The human is still going, one student said with surprise. Wait until the next phase, another replied. She cannot possibly handle everything. 4 hours passed. The environment cycled again. Temperature returned to moderate levels. Oxygen returned to normal. But now the humidity spiked dramatically. The chamber became like a rainforest, thick with moisture. Thornick's armor began to feel uncomfortable. Moisture seeped into the joints, making movement difficult. His species evolved in dry climates. Heavy humidity was unnatural and stressful. Zenri suffered most from this change. His species came from desert worlds with almost no moisture. The thick air made his skin itch and burn. His glow flickered erratically. He moved to a corner and tried to minimize his exposure to the wet air. Puel remained stable. His gaseous form did not interact with water vapor the same way solid bodies did. Lucy actually seemed slightly better. Humans evolved in various climates, including humid jungles. She drank more water to replace what she lost through sweat, but otherwise adapted quickly. Professor Tilvan made notes on her data pad. The human shows remarkable flexibility. Her vital signs adjust to each change faster than expected. 6 hours into the experiment, the chamber introduced a new challenge. The lights dimmed to near darkness, simulating night conditions. At the same time, random noise played through hidden speakers. Clicks, hums, and occasional loud sounds disrupted any chance of peaceful rest. Thornick tried to sleep, but his species needed long, deep rest periods. The noise kept waking him. He grew irritable and frustrated. Zenri needed rest as well. The environmental stress had drained him. But the constant disruptions prevented proper sleep. His glow became very dim. Puel entered a deeper meditation state. External sounds did not penetrate his trance. Lucy laid down on her bench with her blanket. She closed her eyes but did not fully sleep. Instead, she entered a light rest state, remaining partially aware of her surroundings. Every time a loud noise occurred, she woke briefly, assessed the situation, then returned to rest. This broken sleep pattern was not ideal, but her body could function on it. Outside, Professor Tilvan addressed the watching students. Notice how each species responds differently to combined stressors. This is the true test of survival biology. The students watched in growing fascination. Their easy predictions about the human quitting early were clearly wrong. Lucy was still going, adapting to each new challenge with quiet determination. At the 8-hour mark, Professor Tilvan initiated the next environmental sequence. The temperature readings on her control panel began dropping rapidly. She watched the numbers fall with clinical interest, her scaled fingers poised over the emergency override controls. Inside the chamber, the air turned brutally cold. The temperature plummeted to -15 degrees Celsius within minutes. Ice crystals formed on every metal surface. The breath of those who breathed became thick white clouds that hung in the air. Thornick had been pacing to stay warm from the previous cold cycle. Now he stopped moving, his body going rigid. His thick armor, which had protected his ancestors from predators and impacts, became a cage of frozen metal. The extreme cold made the material contract and stress in ways it was never meant to handle. A sharp cracking sound echoed through the chamber. Everyone outside the observation windows pressed closer. Holographic displays zoomed in on Thornick's body. A thin line had appeared across his shoulder plate, a fracture in the armor that had seemed indestructible. Thornick made a deep groaning sound. Pain registered in his vital signs on Professor Tilvan's monitors. He moved carefully toward the designated safe zone, a small area where temperature remained moderate. The chamber rules allowed contestants to retreat to safe zones, but time spent there counted against their performance. First retreat at 8 hours 4 minutes, Professor Tilvan announced to the watching students. Thornick's armor has sustained stress damage from thermal shock. The students who had bet on Thornick lasting the full 48 hours groaned in disappointment. Credits changed hands through personal devices. Inside the chamber, Zenri struggled with a different problem. The earlier humidity had not left the air completely. Now moisture was freezing on his skin. His species had evolved on a desert planet where water was rare and precious. Ice forming on his body was deeply wrong to his biology. His glow had dimmed to almost nothing. He shivered constantly, a behavior his species rarely exhibited. But Zenri was proud. He refused to retreat to the safe zone where Thornick now sat, trying to warm his damaged armor. Instead, Zenri curled into a tight ball near one of the light fixtures, trying to absorb whatever minimal heat it produced. Piwail floated in the center of the room, his gaseous form completely undisturbed. Temperature meant nothing to a being made of swirling methane and other gases. He had not moved from his meditation trance in hours. His vital signs remained perfectly stable. Lucy sat on her bench with her blanket wrapped tightly around her body. She had pulled her arms inside her shirt for extra warmth. Her breathing was controlled and steady, each exhale visible in the freezing air. She rocked slowly back and forth, generating tiny amounts of heat through movement. Her fingers and toes were cold, she could feel them going numb. But she had experienced this before during winter survival training on Earth. She knew the warning signs of frostbite. She knew how to keep blood flowing to her extremities. Every few minutes, she flexed her fingers and wiggled her toes inside her shoes. Outside, a student named Krevna spoke up. She was from an ice world herself. Look at the human's technique. She is using micro-movements to maintain circulation. That is actually smart. Other students leaned closer to their displays. They had expected Lucy to rush to the safe zone immediately. Instead, she endured. 10 hours passed. Professor Tilvan changed the environment again. The temperature rose back to comfortable levels. The ice melted quickly, turning to water that drained through floor vents. But now the humidity returned with intensity. The chamber became a steam room. Moisture filled the air so thick it was almost hard to breathe. Water condensed on every surface. The atmosphere felt heavy and oppressive. Thornick emerged from the safe zone, his armor still showing the crack from earlier. He tried to resume normal activity, but the thick humid air made him feel like he was drowning. His species had lungs designed for dry, thin atmospheres. This was torture. After 20 minutes of suffering, he retreated to the safe zone again. Zenri could not tolerate it at all. His skin, which had just recovered from the ice, now burned from the moisture in the air. His species could handle temperatures that would melt rock, but they needed dry heat. Humid heat was poison to them. His vital signs spiked in distress. Red warnings appeared on Professor Tilvan's monitors. Zenri is approaching unsafe levels, she announced calmly. He has 30 seconds to retreat or I will intervene. Zenri heard the announcement through his translation device. Pride battled with survival instinct. Finally, with a sound like escaping steam, he drifted to the safe zone and landed next to Thornick. Both alien students sat in the protected area, watching Lucy through the observation window that separated the safe zone from the main chamber. Lucy had removed her outer layer again. Her shirt was soaked with sweat. Her hair had come loose from its tie and hung wet against her neck. She drank water steadily, replacing what her body lost. She moved very little, sitting still to avoid generating excess heat. Puel continued his meditation, completely unbothered. The watching students had gone quiet. Their earlier laughter and confident predictions had disappeared. They stared at their displays in confusion. "How is she still functioning?" one student asked. "She has no armor, no special abilities. She should have quit hours ago," another said. Krevna, the Ice World student, studied Lucy's vital signs carefully. "Look at her readings. Her body is stressed, but it keeps adjusting. When the temperature drops, her metabolism increases. When it rises, her body sweats to cool down. When oxygen is low, her breathing changes. She adapts to each challenge." "But that should exhaust her," a third student protested. "Constant adaptation requires enormous energy. Unless," Krevna said slowly, "her species is built for constant adaptation. What if that is their survival trait?" Professor Tilvan heard this comment and allowed herself a small smile. Some students were beginning to understand. 12 hours into the experiment, the environment shifted again. Temperature dropped to slightly cool. Humidity decreased. Oxygen levels dropped back to 15%. But now the chamber introduced a new element. The lights flickered randomly. Sometimes bright, sometimes dark. The unpredictability made rest impossible. Thornick, still in the safe zone, tried to sleep. His body needed proper rest cycles to heal his damaged armor. But the flickering lights kept disrupting his attempts. He grew increasingly frustrated. Zenri remained in the safe zone as well. The stress from the humidity had weakened him significantly. His glow was barely visible now. He needed time to recover. Puel maintained his trance, but even he showed small signs of strain. His gaseous form swirled more rapidly than before. The constant environmental changes were finally beginning to affect even him. Lucy stood up from her bench and began walking slowly around the chamber. Her muscles were stiff from sitting. The low oxygen made her breathe harder, but she maintained a steady pace. She walked for 10 minutes, then rested for 5. Walk, rest, walk, rest. She kept her body moving without exhausting herself. Outside, students watched in growing amazement. The human who they had dismissed as fragile and weak was outlasting species with obvious physical advantages. The betting had stopped. No one knew what to predict anymore. Professor Tilvan made detailed notes. Her experiment was revealing something important. Something that would change how the galaxy understood Deathworld species. The human was not surviving through superior strength or special abilities. She was surviving through something else entirely. Through flexibility. Through adaptation. Through simple, stubborn refusal to quit. The chamber continued its relentless cycles. Temperature swings. Atmospheric changes. Light and darkness. Noise and silence. Each challenge tested different aspects of survival. And through it all, Lucy kept going. Not easily. Not comfortably. But she kept going. Thornick watched from the safe zone, his confidence shattered. Zenri lay recovering, his pride wounded. Pyl floated in meditation, maintaining his performance but no longer looking superior. And Lucy walked her slow circles, breathing deeply, adapting to whatever came next. At 36 hours, Professor Tilvan activated the final major challenge. A soft chime sounded through the chamber speakers, drawing the attention of all 4 contestants. The holographic display on the chamber wall flickered to life with new instructions. Phase 4 begins now, Professor Tilvan's voice announced. Food and water are now rationed. You will receive limited supplies at 6-hour intervals. Portions are calculated for basic human metabolic needs. Species with different requirements must adapt accordingly. Inside the safe zone, Thornick's eyes widened. His species required almost 3 times the calories of a human due to their massive size and armored bodies. Basic human portions would leave him starving. Zenri, still recovering in the safe zone, made a distressed sound. His species did not eat food the way most beings did. They absorbed radiation and certain mineral compounds. Standard rations meant nothing to him. They might as well have offered him rocks. Puel's meditation trance broke for the first time in hours. His gaseous form swirled with agitation. His species consumed specialized chemical compounds in gas form. Solid food and liquid water were completely useless to his biology. Lucy stood near the supply station as a small panel opened. Inside was a basic meal. Protein bars, dried fruit, a handful of nuts, and a bottle of water. Enough to keep a human alive, but barely enough to stay comfortable. She picked up the supplies and returned to her bench. She divided the food into smaller portions, separating them carefully. She would make this ration last the full 6 hours before the next one arrived. She ate one small piece of the protein bar, chewing slowly and thoroughly. Her body needed fuel, but she had learned long ago how to function on minimal food. Thornick emerged from the safe zone, drawn by desperate hunger. He approached the supply station and found his own ration waiting. The portion looked tiny in his massive clawed hands. He consumed everything in 3 bites. It barely touched his hunger. His stomach, designed to process large amounts of food to fuel his enormous body, cramped painfully. He looked at Lucy, who was eating her food in tiny, measured bites. "How can you survive on so little?" he asked. His voice sounded weak. Lucy swallowed before answering. "My species evolved as persistence hunters. We would track prey animals for days, sometimes weeks, across vast distances. We learned to function while hungry, while tired, while everything hurt. We did not stop until we caught our food." "That sounds like torture," Thornick said. "It was survival," Lucy replied. She took a small sip of water. "Earth did not give us armor or claws or poison. It gave us the ability to keep going when stopping seemed easier." Thornick returned to the safe zone, his body already feeling the effects of inadequate nutrition. His movements were slower, more careful. The crack in his armor seemed to ache more. Zenri stared at his ration with despair. Solid food was not just inadequate for him, it was nearly toxic. His digestive system could not process it properly. He tried absorbing energy from the chamber lights, but they were too weak. His glow dimmed further. After an hour of suffering, Zenri pressed his emergency button. "I must exit," he said through his translation device. "I cannot continue without proper sustenance. My biology requires specific compounds this environment cannot provide." Professor Tilvan opened the chamber door remotely. "Zenri has voluntarily exited at 37 hours, 12 minutes. Medical team, please evaluate his condition." Zenri floated out of the chamber slowly, his light barely visible. The watching students parted to let him through. Some looked at him with sympathy. Others with disappointment. He had talked so confidently about his advantages. Inside the chamber, Puel faced his own crisis. He had remained in meditation to conserve energy, but even his species needed sustenance eventually. The chemical compounds his body required were not present in the rations or the atmosphere. He could survive longer than Zenri, but not indefinitely. At hour 40, Puel's form began to lose cohesion. His gases swirled more weakly. The vital signs Professor Tilvan monitored showed dangerous levels developing. "Puel," she announced firmly, "you are approaching critical levels. Exit now or I will terminate your participation." Puel's translation device crackled. "I acknowledge. I cannot continue." His gaseous form drifted to the exit as the door opened. The human was correct. "This tests something I do not possess." He floated out of the chamber, leaving only Thornick and Lucy. The watching students stood in complete silence. The 2 species everyone had dismissed, the armored Kralix and the fragile human, were the last ones remaining. But only one of them was truly functional. Thornick sat in the safe zone, conserving every bit of energy. His body was eating its own reserves, trying to fuel his massive frame on inadequate rations. His movements had become painful and slow. The crack in his armor had spread slightly, a visible reminder of how the environment had broken his greatest advantage. Lucy continued her routine. Walk slowly for 10 minutes. Rest for 5. Drink small amounts of water. Eat tiny portions of food at regular intervals. Her body was tired and hungry, but it was familiar with these sensations. Earth had taught humans that discomfort was not the same as failure. At hour 42, the environment cycled through another temperature drop. Thornick's weakened body could not generate enough internal heat. He shivered violently in the safe zone, his armor rattling. His vital signs showed increasing distress. Lucy wrapped her blanket tighter and kept moving. Motion generated warmth. She had learned this during cold nights in the mountains of Earth. "How?" Thornick called out to her. "How are you still going?" Lucy paused in her walking. "My planet tried to kill my ancestors every single day. Extreme heat. Extreme cold. Predators with claws and teeth. Diseases. Starvation. Dehydration. My species survived because we could adapt faster than the challenges changed. We could keep going when our prey collapsed. We could outlast threats that were stronger and faster than us." She resumed walking. "You have armor that makes you strong. But on Earth, strength alone was not enough. The strongest predators died when food became scarce. The fastest prey died when climates shifted. Humans survived because we could handle everything at once. Not perfectly. Just well enough to keep going." Thornick lowered his head. His pride had been shattered along with his armor. Hour 45 arrived. The final rations were distributed. Thornick consumed his portion immediately, but it provided almost no relief. His body was shutting down non-essential functions to conserve energy. His movements became mechanical and difficult. Lucy ate her ration slowly, making it last. She knew these were the final hours. Her body ached everywhere. Her muscles were sore. Her skin was dry and irritated from the constant environmental changes. She was hungry and tired. But none of this was unbearable. She had felt worse during long-distance runs on Earth. She had been more tired during survival training exercises. This was hard, but hard was not impossible. At hour 47, Thornick pressed his emergency button. "I cannot continue," he said quietly. "My body is failing. The human has won." Professor Tilvan opened the door. "Thornick has exited at 47 hours, 8 minutes. Lucy, you may complete the final hour or exit now with full credit." Lucy checked her remaining supplies. 1 small portion of food. Half a bottle of water. 52 minutes remaining. She sat down on her bench. "I will finish, Professor." The watching students erupted in conversation. The human, the one they had given 3 to 6 hours at most, was going to complete the entire 48-hour challenge. Alone. Still functional. The final hour passed slowly. Lucy rested quietly, her body conserving energy now that the pressure was off. When the timer reached 0, a tone sounded through the chamber. "Experiment complete," Professor Tilvan announced. "Lucy, you may exit." Lucy stood, gathered her few belongings and walked to the door. Her steps were steady. She was tired, hungry and sore, but she walked out under her own power. The chamber door sealed behind her with a final hiss. Lucy stepped out of the chamber into the observation room. Every student in the class stared at her in silence. She looked exhausted, her hair messy and her clothes wrinkled, but she walked without assistance. Medical staff rushed forward with scanners, checking her vital signs and hydration levels. Elevated stress hormones but within acceptable ranges, one medic reported. Mild dehydration. Muscle fatigue. No permanent damage. Professor Tilvan approached Lucy with a container of water and a proper meal. "Eat slowly," she instructed. "Your digestive system needs time to adjust." Lucy accepted the food gratefully and sat down. She ate in small bites just as she had during the experiment. The watching students gradually moved closer, forming a loose circle around her. "I do not understand," one student said finally. "You have no armor. No radiation resistance. No ability to survive in vacuum. How did you outlast everyone?" Lucy swallowed her food before answering. "Because I did not need to be the best at any single thing. I just needed to be good enough at everything." Professor Tilvan's scales shimmered as she moved to the front of the observation room. She activated the large holographic display, showing data compilations from the entire 48-hour experiment. Charts and graphs appeared in the air, tracking temperature changes, atmospheric shifts, and vital signs from all 4 participants. "Class, what you witnessed today was not simply one species defeating others," Tilvan began. Her voice carried the authority of decades of teaching. "This was a demonstration of a fundamental principle in survival biology that many of you have misunderstood." She gestured to the display showing Thornick's data. Thornick's species, the Kralix, evolved exceptional physical armor. In their natural environment, this armor makes them nearly invincible. Predators cannot bite through it. Environmental hazards cannot penetrate it. This single spectacular adaptation allowed them to dominate their world. The display shifted to Zenri's data. Zenri's people, the Voltari, developed the ability to process radiation and extreme heat. On their planet, this makes them the apex species. They can survive in areas that would kill most other life forms instantly. Another shift showed PYL's information. PYL's species, the Nephians, evolved to survive in vacuum and breathe gases toxic to most beings. In space environments, they have tremendous advantages. Professor Tilvan paused, letting the information settle. Then she brought up Lucy's data. The graphs showed wild fluctuations. Heart rate rising and falling. Body temperature adjusting constantly. Metabolism speeding up and slowing down. Breathing patterns changing throughout the experiment. "Now look at the human," Tilvan said. Lucy has no single exceptional adaptation. Her skin provides minimal protection. She requires oxygen like most species. She needs regular food and water. By individual measurements, she appears unremarkable. She zoomed in on specific sections of Lucy's data. But watch what happens when we introduce multiple stressors simultaneously. Her body does not have one perfect response. Instead, it has dozens of adequate responses. When temperature drops, her metabolism increases and she moves to generate heat. When oxygen is low, her breathing efficiency improves. When food is scarce, her body conserves energy and processes reserves. Each response is not spectacular, but together they are sufficient. A student raised a hand tentatively. But professor, that seems inefficient. Why have many weak abilities instead of one strong ability? Lucy spoke up from where she sat. Because planets do not provide one challenge at a time. Earth never said, today you only face cold or today you only face hunger. It gave us everything at once. Hot days with no water. Cold nights with no shelter. Injuries while being chased by predators. Hunger while traveling long distances. She took another sip of water. My ancestors survived because they could handle all of it together. Not perfectly. A Kralix could survive cold better than any human. A Voltari could survive heat better. But when you combine cold and hunger and fatigue and injury all at once, humans just keep functioning. Professor Tilvan nodded approvingly. Precisely. This is the defining characteristic of Deathworld species. They do not evolve superior individual traits. They evolve superior flexibility and resilience across multiple simultaneous stressors. She pulled up comparative data on the display. Earth is classified as a Class 12 Deathworld. Do you know what that means? It means Earth presents more combined environmental challenges than 98% of habitable planets in known space. Extreme temperature variations. High gravity. Dangerous weather patterns. Abundant predators. Scarce resources in many regions. Seasonal changes that require constant adaptation. The graphs showed Earth's environmental data compared to the homeworlds of the other species. Earth's readings fluctuated wildly across every category. The other planets showed much more stability in their conditions. Species that evolve on stable planets develop specialized adaptations for their specific environment, Tilvan continued. But species that evolve on chaotic planets like Earth cannot afford specialization. They must be generalists who can handle whatever comes next. Another student spoke up, this time with more respect in their voice. Is this true of all Deathworld species? Are they all like this? Not all, Tilvan admitted. Some Deathworld species develop extreme aggression or enhanced healing or other specific traits. But the most successful Deathworld species, the ones that achieve space travel and join galactic society, tend to share humanity's pattern. Adaptability. Persistence. The ability to continue functioning under conditions that would stop more specialized species. She turned to address the full class. This is why I designed this experiment. Many of you have heard stories about Deathworlders being tough or dangerous. You have heard humans described as resilient or stubborn. But you did not understand what those words truly meant. Tilvan gestured to Lucy. This human is not stronger than Thornik. She is not more resistant to radiation than Zenri. She cannot survive in vacuum like Piwell. But she is nearly impossible to stop. Not because she has superior abilities, but because she has sufficient abilities for almost any situation. You cannot find her single weakness to exploit, because she has no single dependence. The classroom remained silent as students processed this information. Many looked at Lucy with new eyes. She was no longer the fragile, weak human they had dismissed. She was something more complex and perhaps more dangerous in its own way. A student named Krevna, who had been observing carefully throughout, asked a question. Professor, does this mean Deathworlders are actually superior to specialized species? Tilvan shook her head firmly. No. In stable environments with predictable challenges, specialized species have significant advantages. Thornik would outlast Lucy easily in a simple strength competition. Zenri would dominate in a radiation-rich environment. Pyl would succeed where oxygen breathers would fail immediately. She pointed to the chamber behind them. But survival is rarely about single challenges. Real survival, whether in nature or in complex galactic society, requires handling multiple problems at once. This is where Deathworld flexibility becomes valuable. Not superiority. Complementarity. Professor Tilvan saved the experiment data and turned to face her students directly. This recording will be added to the xenobiology curriculum across the Academy network. Future students will study it to understand a crucial lesson. Never underestimate a species based on apparent weaknesses. Understand instead what pressures shape them and what situations they are adapted to handle. She looked at each student in turn. The galaxy contains thousands of species with thousands of different adaptations. We all have strengths. We all have weaknesses. True wisdom lies in understanding both in ourselves and in others. Lucy finished her meal and stood up slowly. Her legs were still tired but steady. Several students approached her, no longer mocking but genuinely curious. "Can you teach us about Earth?" one asked. "About how humans survive there?" Lucy smiled slightly. "Earth taught us one lesson above all others. Keep going. When you are cold, keep going. When you are hungry, keep going. When you are tired and hurt and everything says to stop, you keep going. Because on Earth, stopping meant dying. So we learned not to stop." Another student, who had bet heavily against Lucy lasting even 6 hours, approached hesitantly. "I apologize for underestimating you." "You did not underestimate me," Lucy replied. "You estimated based on the information you had. Now you have new information. That is how learning works." Professor Tilvan watched the interaction with satisfaction. The experiment had succeeded beyond her expectations. Her students had learned not just facts about Deathworld biology, but something deeper about assumptions and respect. As the class filed out, talking excitedly about what they had witnessed, Tilvan saved a copy of the complete experiment data to her personal archive. She marked it with a note: Deathworlder Resilience Study. Recommended viewing for all xenobiology programs. Key lesson: invincibility is not about being unable to be hurt. It is about being unable to be stopped.